My father forced me to become a drug addict from the moment I was born. I mean that literally. I don't remember a time when I wasn't high. My earliest childhood memory isn't a birthday party or a family vacation. It's the taste of crushed pills mixed into my apple juice. I was 4 years old, sitting at our kitchen table while my father ground up white tablets with the back of a spoon and stirred them into my breakfast. He called it my vitamin routine, said it would make me strong like him and my older sister Natalie. I believed him because what else does a 4-year-old know? The pills made everything feel soft and distant, like I was wrapped in cotton. Dad said that meant they were working. By the time I was 7, I could identify different pills by sight. The small blue ones were for energy, the round white ones were for calming down, the capsules with the little beads inside were for focus. Dad kept them all in a tackle box in his bedroom, organized by color and effect. He'd open it every morning like a ritual, selecting what we needed for the day ahead. Natalie was 3 years older than me and Dad's pride and joy. She'd been on the vitamin routine since she was 2, and by 10 she could swallow pills dry without water. Dad would brag about her tolerance to anyone who'd listen. My daughter can handle doses that would put grown men on their backs, he'd say with this twisted pride in his voice. She never complains, never gets sick, just takes what she needs and keeps going. I wanted that approval so badly. I wanted Dad to look at me the way he looked at Natalie, with this satisfied smile like he'd created something perfect. So I learned to swallow pills without flinching, learned to hide the nausea and the way my hands would shake when the doses got higher, learned to act normal when my heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. Mom had left when I was 2, and I barely remembered her. Dad said she couldn't handle the family lifestyle, that she was weak and judgmental. He had full custody and zero supervision. No one checked on us. No one asked questions. Dad worked from home as some kind of consultant, which meant he was always there, always watching, always controlling exactly what went into our bodies. The neighborhood kids thought we were weird. We never played outside for long, never had friends over, never went to sleepovers. Dad said other families wouldn't understand our routine, that they'd try to interfere if they knew. By the time I was 9, I was taking 6 different medications daily. Dad had a chart on the refrigerator tracking our doses, our reactions, what combinations worked best. He treated us like an experiment, constantly adjusting and fine-tuning. When I asked why we needed so many vitamins, he said it was because we were special. Regular kids were soft and unprepared for the real world. We were being trained to handle anything, to push past normal human limitations. He made it sound like a gift, like he was doing us a favor by building up our tolerance to substances that would destroy other people. Natalie seemed to believe every word. She'd swallow her morning handful of pills and smile at Dad like he'd just given her a present. I tried to copy her enthusiasm, but something inside me always felt wrong about it. School was a nightmare. The pills made it hard to focus sometimes, made my thoughts feel scattered and slow. Other times, they made me too focused, like I was hyper-aware of every sound and movement in the classroom. Teachers would comment on my behavior, how I'd be sleepy one day and jittery the next. Dad would smooth it over, saying I had medical conditions that required careful medication management. He'd show up to parent-teacher conferences with a briefcase full of fake medical documents and charm them all into believing him. I got good at pretending everything was normal. Got good at lying about why my pupils were sometimes too big or too small, why I'd shake during tests, why I'd sometimes zone out completely in the middle of class. My best friend Olivia once asked why I took so many bathroom breaks. I told her I had a weak bladder. The truth was, I was going to throw up from whatever new combination Dad had given me that morning. By 5th grade, I'd developed a system for hiding how sick I felt. Smile through the nausea, breathe through the panic, act like the room spinning was completely normal. Natalie started having problems when she turned 14. She'd wake up with nosebleeds that wouldn't stop. Her hands would shake so badly she couldn't hold a pencil. She lost 15 pounds in 2 months because she couldn't keep food down. Dad's response was to adjust her medication schedule, add new pills to counteract the side effects of the old ones. He called it recalibration. I called it watching my sister slowly fall apart. She'd stumble through the house like a ghost, her skin taking on this grayish tint that made her look half dead. I begged Dad to take her to a real doctor, but he said doctors would overreact and try to take us away. He said the system was designed to destroy families like ours, who understood that strength required sacrifice. I was 12 and starting to realize that what Dad called vitamins were actually prescription medications stolen from somewhere, bought illegally, God knows what else. I'd seen enough after-school specials to know this wasn't normal, wasn't safe, wasn't what other families did. But speaking up meant risking everything. Meant risking Dad's anger, which could be terrifying. The night everything changed, Natalie collapsed in the bathroom. I found her on the tile floor, unconscious, foam coming out of her mouth. Her body was jerking and twitching in ways that made my stomach drop. I screamed for Dad, who came running and immediately started doing damage control instead of calling 911. He carried her to her bed, propped her up, tried to force water down her throat. I stood in the doorway watching this nightmare unfold, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. "Call an ambulance," I begged. "She needs help. She'll be fine," Dad said, not looking at me. "She just needs to sleep it off. This happens sometimes when you're building tolerance. She's not breathing right." I was crying now, my voice breaking. "Please, Dad, please call someone." He finally looked at me, and the expression on his face was something I'd never seen before. Pure, cold calculation. If we call 911, they'll take you both away. They'll destroy everything we've built. Is that what you want? I called 911 from my bedroom while Dad was focused on Natalie. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial, but I managed to gasp out our address and that my sister needed help. The operator stayed on the line, asking questions I could barely answer. What did she take? How much? How long ago? I didn't know. I'd never known exactly what Dad was giving us. I just knew my sister was dying, and my father was more worried about getting caught than saving her life. The sirens felt like they took forever to arrive. When the paramedics burst through our front door, Dad's whole demeanor changed. He became the concerned father, wringing his hands and explaining that Natalie had gotten into his medication cabinet without permission, that she'd been struggling with depression and must have taken too much. The paramedics were focused on saving Natalie, not questioning his story. They loaded her onto a stretcher, hooking up IVs and oxygen, barking medical terms I didn't understand. I tried to climb into the ambulance with her, but Dad held me back. "You stay here with me," he said quietly, his grip on my arm tight enough to bruise. "We need to talk." The second the ambulance pulled away, Dad's facade dropped. "What did you tell them?" His voice was deadly quiet. "I told them she needed help. That's all." "Did you tell them about the medication routine? About our vitamins?" I hesitated too long, and he saw the answer in my face. He dragged me inside and went straight to his bedroom, pulling out the tackle box full of pills. He started shoving handfuls down the garbage disposal, flushing others down the toilet, erasing evidence as fast as he could. Then he turned to me with an expression that made my blood freeze. "If anyone asks, we don't have a medication routine. Natalie found my prescription pills and took them without permission. She's been depressed lately, struggling. You noticed but didn't want to tell me because you were protecting her. Understand?" I nodded, too terrified to do anything else. He grabbed my shoulders, squeezing hard. "I've protected you your whole life, given you advantages other kids don't have. Don't throw that away by talking to the wrong people. They'll separate us, put you in foster care where actually bad things happen. This is your family, your only family." At the hospital, Natalie was in the ICU for 3 days. The doctors asked questions, lots of questions. What medications was she taking? Did she have a history of substance abuse? Had there been any warning signs? Dad spun his story perfectly. Natalie had been depressed after a breakup with her boyfriend. She'd found his anxiety medication and taken too much. He blamed himself for not locking up his prescriptions properly, for not seeing how much she was struggling. The doctors seemed to buy it. They were more focused on treating Natalie's overdose than investigating how it happened. But there was one nurse, Eleanor, who looked at me differently. She noticed things. The way I flinched when Dad touched me. How I wouldn't make eye contact with him. The small tremors in my hands that I couldn't quite control. She pulled me aside one afternoon while Dad was in the cafeteria. "Honey, are you okay at home?" Her voice was gentle, concerned. I nodded automatically. "I'm fine. You don't look fine. You look like you're going through something. Is your dad giving you anything? Any medications?" The question hung in the air between us. This was my chance. My one opportunity to tell someone the truth, to escape the nightmare my life had become. But I thought about what Dad said. About foster care, about losing the only family I had, about Natalie needing me when she woke up. I shook my head. He doesn't give me anything. I'm just worried about my sister. Eleanor didn't look convinced, but she couldn't force me to talk. She gave me her card with her personal number written on the back. "If you ever need help, call me, day or night." I took the card and shoved it deep in my pocket, knowing I'd never use it. Natalie woke up on day 4. The first thing she did was look for Dad, and when he came to her bedside, she apologized. "I'm sorry I messed up," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry I took too much. I'll be more careful next time." Dad smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "It's okay, sweetheart. We all make mistakes. We'll just adjust your routine when you get home. Everything will be fine." I felt something crack inside me hearing those words. Next time, adjust your routine. Everything will be fine. Nothing was fine. Nothing had ever been fine. My sister had almost died, and Dad's solution was to keep doing exactly what had nearly killed her. I started planning my escape that day. I was 12 years old and trapped in a house with a man who was systematically poisoning his own children, but I was done being complicit. I started hiding pills instead of swallowing them, pretending to take them while palming them and flushing them later. It wasn't easy. Dad watched us carefully, especially after Natalie's overdose. But I got better at the deception, at acting like the drugs were hitting my system when I was actually completely sober for the first time in my life. The clarity was terrifying. Without the chemical fog, I could see our situation for what it really was. We were being abused, systematically, deliberately poisoned by the one person who was supposed to protect us, and everyone around us was either oblivious or complicit in their silence. Withdrawal hit me hard. Without the daily doses my body had become dependent on, I started experiencing symptoms that scared me. Sweating through my sheets at night, shaking so badly I could barely hold a glass. Nausea that made it impossible to eat. Dad noticed I wasn't looking right and increased my doses, which I continued to hide. The cycle became its own kind of torture. I was getting sicker trying to get clean, and Dad was pushing more drugs on me to fix symptoms caused by not taking drugs. It was twisted and impossible, and I had no idea how to break free. Natalie's hospital stay had triggered a CPS investigation, but Dad handled it perfectly. He showed them his fake medical documents, his prescription bottles with his name on them, his Concerned Father Act. The social worker who came to our house did a cursory inspection, asked a few questions, and left satisfied that Natalie's overdose had been an isolated incident of teenage rebellion. I wanted to scream the truth at her, but the words wouldn't come. What if she didn't believe me? What if they took Natalie away but left me with Dad? What if I ended up somewhere worse? My body started failing around age 13. I'd wake up with my heart racing so fast I thought I was dying. My kidneys hurt constantly. I lost patches of hair. My hands shook all the time now, not just when I was in withdrawal. I was caught between two impossible choices. Keep taking the drugs and let them destroy me, or stop taking them and risk Dad figuring out what I was doing. I chose a middle path, taking just enough to keep Dad from getting suspicious, but not enough to maintain the tolerance I'd built up. It meant being sick all the time, stuck in perpetual partial withdrawal, but it also meant I was clear-headed enough to start documenting what was happening. I stole Dad's phone one night while he was asleep and photographed everything in the tackle box. Every pill bottle, every label, every dosage instruction he'd written in his careful handwriting. I sent the photos to an email address I'd created at the library, one Dad didn't know about. Then I started recording conversations. Dad explaining to Natalie why she needed to increase her dose. Dad talking on the phone about where he was getting the medications. Dad detailing his theories about building superhuman tolerance through careful chemical management. The evidence I collected was damning, but I still had no idea what to do with it. Who would believe a 13-year-old kid accusing her father of systematic drug abuse? Especially when that father was so good at presenting a normal facade to the outside world. I needed help, but I was terrified of reaching out. Every kid at school had heard horror stories about foster care, about being separated from siblings, about abuse worse than what you left, about aging out of the system with nothing and no one. But watching Natalie get worse made the choice for me. She'd started having seizures. Small ones at first, just her eyes rolling back for a few seconds, then bigger ones that left her unconscious for minutes. Dad adjusted her medications, but never considered that the medications themselves might be the problem. I'm building up her tolerance, he'd explain when I questioned him. Her body is learning to handle higher doses. Soon she'll be stronger than ever. She wasn't getting stronger. She was dying, and I was the only person who could see it. I called Eleanor from a payphone after school one day. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the receiver, but I managed to explain everything. The pills, the doses, the years of systematic drugging disguised as vitamins. Eleanor listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. I believe you, she finally said, and I'm going to help you. But this is going to be hard. Your father will fight this. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Natalie seizing on the bathroom floor, about the tackle box full of pills that was slowly killing us both, about the life I might have if someone actually intervened and stopped this nightmare. Yes, I said. I'm ready. Eleanor connected me with a detective who specialized in child abuse cases. Detective Rains met me at the library, away from Dad's watchful eyes, and I showed her everything. The photos, the recordings, the medical symptoms Natalie and I were experiencing. She listened carefully, taking notes, her expression growing increasingly grim. This is serious, she said when I finished. What your father is doing is classified as child abuse and drug trafficking, but building a case will take time. Can you keep yourself safe until we're ready to move? I said yes, but I had no idea how I was going to manage it. Dad was watching me more carefully lately, commenting on how I seemed different, how my pupils weren't quite right, how I was acting strange. I think you're building up a resistance, he said one morning, studying me like I was one of his experiments. We need to increase your doses. He started giving me double what I'd been hiding, which meant I couldn't palm all of it without him noticing. I had to actually swallow some, had to feel that familiar fog creeping back over my thoughts, had to remember what it felt like to be constantly chemically altered. The police investigation moved slowly, too slowly. Detective Rains explained they needed to gather enough evidence for charges that would stick, that they needed to coordinate with CPS and medical professionals, that rushing in could give Dad time to destroy evidence or flee with us. But every day that passed was another day of watching Natalie deteriorate, another day of poison being forced into our systems, another day of living in fear. I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake by reaching out. Maybe no one was actually going to help us. Maybe I'd just made things worse. Then Detective Rains called and said they were ready to move. They'd obtained warrants for Dad's arrest and for the seizure of all medications in our house. They'd coordinated with CPS to have emergency placement ready for Natalie and me. It was happening. Finally, actually happening. The day they came for Dad felt surreal. I was sitting in math class when the principal called me to the office. Eleanor was there, along with a woman from CPS who introduced herself as Leslie. They explained that police were at my house right now, that Dad was being arrested, that Natalie had been taken directly from her school to the hospital for evaluation. You're safe now, Leslie said gently, Both of you are safe. But I didn't feel safe. I felt terrified. What happened next? Where would we go? What would Dad tell people? What if no one believed the evidence we'd gathered? Eleanor seemed to read my thoughts. Your father can't hurt you anymore. The evidence you collected, combined with medical records and our investigation, is more than enough for serious charges. He's going to prison for a long time. The next hours blurred together. I was taken to the hospital where Natalie was being examined. She looked small and scared in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and IVs. When she saw me, she started crying. They took Dad, she said. They arrested him. Why did you do this? Why did you tell them? Because he was killing us, I said, my own tears starting. Nat, he was poisoning us. Those weren't vitamins. They were drugs, prescription medications he was stealing and giving to us illegally. We were addicted. We're still addicted. She shook her head like she could make my words stop being true. No, Dad was helping us, making us stronger. You ruined everything. The doctors had to sedate her when she became too agitated. Eleanor explained that this was normal, that victims of long-term abuse often defended their abusers, that Natalie would need extensive therapy to unpack what had been done to her. I felt guilty for destroying the only reality my sister had ever known, even though I knew that reality was poisonous. The medical evaluations were extensive and horrifying. Both Natalie and I had severe organ damage from years of drug abuse. Our livers were compromised. Our kidneys were showing signs of failure. Our hearts had irregular rhythms from the constant chemical stress. The doctors were amazed we were still alive, that our bodies had withstood years of systematic poisoning that would have killed adults. You'll both need ongoing medical care, the lead physician explained, possibly for the rest of your lives. The damage might be permanent, or it might improve with time and treatment. We'll have to wait and see. I was 13 years old, and being told my father had potentially destroyed my body beyond repair. The rage I felt was overwhelming. How could he do this to us? How could he convince himself he was helping us, while he was actually killing us? The psychiatric evaluation was almost worse than the physical one. A therapist named Dr. Osei sat with me for hours, asking questions about my childhood, my relationship with Dad, my understanding of what had been done to me. When I described the pill routine, the tackle box, Dad's theories about building tolerance, she had to excuse herself. I could see tears in her eyes when she returned. I'm so sorry this happened to you, she said. What your father did was abuse, severe systematic abuse. None of this was your fault, and you were incredibly brave to speak up. But I didn't feel brave. I felt broken. I felt guilty for breaking up our family, even though I knew logically that Dad had broken us long before I called the police. I felt angry at a world that had let this happen, that had missed every sign, that had failed to protect two kids who were being abused in plain sight. Dad's trial was a media circus. The local news picked up the story. Father accused of systematically drugging children for over a decade. People I'd never met had opinions about our case. Some defended Dad, saying he'd been trying to treat his children's medical conditions and had made mistakes. Others called for the death penalty. I tried not to read the comments, but sometimes I couldn't help myself. The things people said about us, about Natalie and me, were cruel beyond belief. Some suggested we were lying for attention. Others said we must have been terrible kids to drive our father to such extreme measures. The prosecution built their case carefully. They brought in medical experts who testified about the damage to our organs. They presented the evidence I'd collected, the photos and recordings that showed Dad's systematic abuse. They interviewed neighbors who remembered odd things about our family, teachers who'd noticed concerning signs. The defense tried to paint Dad as a devoted single father, who'd made mistakes in judgment while trying to help his mentally ill children. They produced fake medical records showing Natalie and I had been diagnosed with various conditions requiring medication. They brought in character witnesses who testified about what a good man Dad was, how involved he'd been in our lives, how dedicated to our well-being. I had to testify. Had to sit in that courtroom and describe every detail of our abuse while Dad stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Betrayal? Anger? Hurt? I couldn't tell anymore. He'd gotten so good at wearing masks that I didn't know if I'd ever seen his real face. When I described finding Natalie seizing on the bathroom floor, several jury members looked ill. When I explained how I'd been hiding pills and pretending to take them, Dad's lawyer tried to twist it into proof that I was deceptive and unreliable. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back with guilty verdicts on all counts, I felt relief and devastation in equal measure. Dad was sentenced to 25 years in prison. I was 13, and my father would be behind bars until I was 38. Natalie had a breakdown when she heard the sentence. She'd been placed in a treatment facility for both her drug addiction and her psychological trauma, and the news of Dad's conviction sent her spiraling. She refused to see me, said I'd destroyed our family, that she'd never forgive me for what I'd done. Eleanor assured me this was temporary, that with treatment, Natalie would eventually understand I'd saved both our lives. But months passed and my sister still wouldn't speak to me. I was placed with a foster family, the Kowalskis, who specialized in taking in kids with medical trauma. They were kind and patient, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong anywhere anymore. I wasn't the person I'd been when Dad was controlling my every chemical intake, but I didn't know who I was without that either. Withdrawal from years of drug abuse was brutal. Even though the doctors were managing it with careful medical supervision, my body revolted. Months of sweating, shaking, nausea, insomnia, panic attacks that felt like dying. The Kowalskis held me through the worst of it, never judging, never demanding I be anything other than what I was, a traumatized kid trying to survive. School was impossible at first. I'd missed so much due to the drug's effects on my cognition that I was years behind academically. Plus, everyone knew who I was. The girl whose dad had drugged her. The girl who sent her father to prison. Kids whispered when I walked past. Some were sympathetic. Others thought I was a freak. I made one friend, Quinn, who'd been in foster care since she was 6. She didn't ask questions about my past. Didn't need me to explain anything. We just existed alongside each other. 2 broken kids trying to figure out how to be normal. Natalie was released from treatment after 6 months. She went to live with our maternal Aunt Julia, who I barely remembered. Aunt Julia reached out to me, asking if I'd like to visit, to try to rebuild a relationship with my sister. I agreed, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. The visit was awkward and painful. Natalie looked healthier physically. The grayish tint was gone from her skin, and she'd gained back the weight she'd lost. But emotionally, she was still a mess. She couldn't look at me directly, couldn't have a conversation that lasted more than a few minutes before finding an excuse to leave the room. "Do you hate me?" I finally asked her directly. "I don't know what I feel," she admitted. "I know logically that Dad was hurting us. The doctors have explained it 100 times. But emotionally, I still feel like you betrayed us. Like you destroyed the only life I knew." "I did destroy it," I said. "Because that life was killing us. You almost died, Nat. I wasn't going to watch you actually die just to keep Dad happy." She started crying then, and I did too. And we held each other for the first time in months. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't resolution. But it was a start. Over the next years, I focused on healing. Physical therapy for my damaged organs, regular medical monitoring to track any long-term effects, therapy twice a week to process the trauma. The Kowalskis were endlessly patient, creating a stable environment where I could slowly rebuild myself into someone who wasn't defined by abuse. I started running when I was 15. At first, just to the end of the block and back, my damaged cardiovascular system protesting every step. But gradually, I built up endurance. Running became my meditation, my therapy, my proof that my body could do hard things that weren't self-destructive. By 16, I was running 5Ks. By 17, half marathons. My doctors were amazed at how my body had recovered, though they warned the damage might catch up with me later in life. I graduated high school on time despite the years I'd lost to drugs and recovery. The Kowalskis threw me a party, and Quinn came, and even Natalie showed up, tentative but present. We'd been rebuilding our relationship slowly, carefully. She was doing better, working with her own therapist, coming to terms with what Dad had done. She'd started calling it abuse, which felt like a huge step forward. I got accepted to a state university with a full scholarship for medical trauma survivors. I decided to study social work, to help other kids who were being abused in ways society didn't recognize. Dad had taught me that abuse could look like care, that poison could be disguised as medicine, that the most dangerous predators were sometimes the people who claimed to love you most. I visited Dad in prison once. I was 19 and needed closure. He looked older, smaller somehow in his prison uniform. When he saw me, his face lit up like nothing had changed. Like he hadn't spent 6 years locked up for what he'd done to his children. "You look good," he said. "Healthy." I didn't respond to the compliment. "I came to ask you why. Why did you do it?" His expression shifted, became defensive. "I was trying to help you. To make you stronger than other kids. I was trying to give you advantages. You were poisoning us. You almost killed Natalie. You destroyed our bodies. I was building your tolerance, teaching you to handle what others couldn't. That's not love, Dad. That's abuse. We'll never be normal. We'll have medical problems for the rest of our lives because of what you did." He looked away. "I did what I thought was right. I see that now," I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "You really believe that? You've convinced yourself that systematically drugging your children was somehow noble. That's the scariest part. Not that you're a monster, but that you think you were being a good father." I never visited him again. There was no point. He'd never acknowledge what he'd done, never admit that his theories about building superhuman tolerance through drug abuse were insane. He'd die believing he was the victim of a system that didn't understand his genius. Natalie and I both struggled with addiction as adults. Despite years of being forced to take drugs, or maybe because of it, we both battled with substance abuse in our 20s. Natalie relapsed twice, each time nearly fatal, before finally achieving stable sobriety at 24. I had my own slip, a year where I self-medicated with alcohol to numb the memories, but we both eventually found our way to recovery meetings, to therapists who specialized in childhood trauma, to each other. We became each other's support system, the only 2 people who truly understood what we'd survived. I'm 30 now. Dad is still in prison and will be for another 8 years. Natalie is married with a daughter she protects fiercely from anything resembling what we experienced. I work as a social worker specializing in medical abuse cases, using my story to identify and stop other parents who disguise abuse as treatment. My body still bears the scars. I have kidney disease that requires monitoring. My liver functions at reduced capacity. I'll never be able to drink alcohol without risking serious damage. But I'm alive. Natalie's alive. We broke the cycle. When I give talks at schools and community centers about recognizing abuse, I always start the same way. My father forced me to become a drug addict from the moment I was born. I mean that literally. And then I tell them everything, holding nothing back, because the only way to stop abuse that hides in plain sight is to drag it into the light and name it for what it is. Some parents in the audience get uncomfortable. Some get angry. But always, at least one kid approaches me afterward and says quietly, "I think something like that is happening to me." And that makes every painful memory, every difficult testimony, every moment of reliving trauma worth it. Because that kid will get help. That kid will survive. That kid won't spend 13 years being slowly poisoned by the person who's supposed to protect them. The cycle breaks one child at a time. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure it keeps breaking. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.